Erin, really good to see you.
Great to see you.
Beautiful Christmas tree in your background. 'Tis the
Thank you.
season here.
Common theme today, it looks like.
So I think so. Here we are. It's upon us here. Well, I'm so excited to have this conversation here. As a matter of introduction, so I'm Ted Smith. I'm the head of enterprise sales for Audigent. Audigent is a audience activation platform. We bring to life first-party data from some of the world's most influential creators out there. So we have prize partnerships with companies like Condé Nast, Universal Music Group, Trusted Media Brands, American Media, and many, many more. And in speaking with all of you marketers out there, we basically make this data actionable for you to use across the programmatic ecosystem. So with that in mind, I'm particularly interested and excited to talk to Erin here. Erin is the Chief Marketing Officer and SVP of Consumer Beauty at Coty. And she brings tremendous experience here to in perspective from beauty, from luxury, from CPG, and has had an amazing career, I think, spanning both clients and agency as well. So excited to have a conversation around innovation here, a great topic for the day. So beauty is a really big category for us here at Audigent. Really excited to have this conversation. And as we think about it, I guess the first question I would have is, when you think about your role, like, how do you think about innovation when it comes to marketing? You made an interesting distinction when we first spoke about how product innovation and digital innovation, kind of the nuance between the two. I'd love to hear some more of it about that.
Sure. So, I think innovation really works best when it starts with a consumer. That's not a surprise, but really knowing who your consumer is inside and out. And then also taking into account what your brand is and what your brand is not. To me, that's what creates innovation that's really different, that breaks through, that's meaningful, and that doesn't confuse consumers. I think we've all seen some, brand innovation where it's just surprising, kind of out of left field. It doesn't feel like it's a fit. So I think having that consistency is really key. It's funny, when we were talking about digital and product innovation, I thought about this a little bit afterwards. And I think one of the challenges that marketers are running into now is that these two streams are often led by different people within the organization. And as a consumer just expects you to show up as a brand that is holistic and cohesive and that understands them. And so I think one of the challenges that marketers are facing today is really making sure that they're bringing teams together to make sure there's this very cohesive experience. We've done a lot of work at Coty to create small project teams to make sure we can work really quickly, but in a way that makes it feel like it's a very holistic consumer experience.
That's amazing, and no easy task to be able to do, I think, when you consider the breadth of products that you have over there as well.
No, but it's great when it comes together.
Amazing, yeah. How is your thought about this? You've had a great career, and I think that how has this changed your consideration of innovation over time?
I've been doing this for a long, long time. I was counting the years today, and I don't know if I'll tell you how many, but it's really interesting. When I started in marketing, I got to work for brands like PepsiCo and L'Oreal, and a lot of the work that I did in innovation at that time was really understanding the codes of the category and winning through innovation by replicating those in a bigger way, in a really powerful way. And I had the privilege, a couple of years ago, working for a founder-led brand called Kind. And I remember sitting in a room with the founder at one point in time and talking about innovation, and he was talking about really disrupting the codes of the category. And as a marketer who'd been trained so differently, it felt so wrong initially. And then as we started to experiment and brought it to life, it worked incredibly, incredibly well. So, I think that's how a lot of founder-led brands are really breaking through, which is by disrupting these codes of the category with innovation. So at Coty, I think it's really interesting. What we've done a lot of work around is making sure absolutely we understand the competition and the codes, but then understanding where we can strategically disrupt, and how does that come to life in a way that can be very impactful and very efficient, and really kind of surprise and delight a consumer. One of the ways that we've done that really recently is with socially conscious beauty. We've had several launches in this space. And I think where we really saw a lot of opportunity was that, there used to be a little bit of a myth that socially conscious or clean beauty, wasn't value driven. It couldn't be affordable, or it wasn't very effective. And we really wanted to kind of disrupt and change that perception with great products. And we recently launched a brand called Lash Blast Clean, which is, the first clean mascara, at scale, at mass. And the beauty of the product is, it has great ingredients, as argan oil. It's clean, it's socially responsible, but it also gives 10 times the volume. So really, making sure that consumers don't have to make trade-offs.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I think there's long been that cliched term of out of the box thinking, I think, but that idea of disrupting the code of the category, I think is particularly interesting. And you can even think about, other categories and what their specific codes are and what you can learn from those categories as
Absolutely.
well. Now, you also had some great examples where you guys were first to market with some partnerships. And I think when you think about, disrupting the code, sometimes that comes with sort of blazing new trails with new ways of establishing partnerships. Any interesting examples of that?
Yeah, I think, I think one of the ways that we tried to kind of disrupt is, looking at really where the consumers are. And our approach to, really first to market partnerships is making sure that we're being strategically experimental, that we're a first mover by design, and really in tune with Gen Z and millennial consumers to quickly, adapt to new realities. So one of the partnerships that we had recently was with GoPuff. And we were the first beauty brand on GoPuff. We saw through the pandemic, obviously, consumers have been, shopping very, very differently. And this gave us an opportunity to really test and learn with a new platform. And what we saw was that, with that first mover advantage, we became the #1 beauty brand, even after new entrants came on board afterwards. So really love that opportunity to partner with brands that are doing things well and to make sure that we're where our consumers are spending their time.
What are the challenges of being that? I mean, in that same way, do you think of being that first to market and blazing those trails?
I mean, it doesn't always work, right? And I think you have to go in with the mindset that you're going to, it's again, going back to kind of understanding the consumer, understanding, how their behavior is changing, making sure that you're aligning with properties that are there first, I think. And then knowing that, when it works, it's great because you have almost this like accelerator that takes place that really helps you. And then, it's not always going to do that. And so just being open to some failure and making sure that that's okay within the organization. You can't do that on everything you do, but certainly sometimes it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, sometimes the initial stage is really only the beginnings of something, and you have to really try it on, and it takes persistence beyond that, I think, as well.
Absolutely.
Now, you guys have had an exciting year, and you've created an in-house creative incubator as well during this time. I think that's particularly interesting and compelling during what's going on in the current environment. How has that helped you when you consider better understanding your customers and speaking to them and using marketing innovation basically to reach those consumers?
Yeah, I think with the in-house incubator in particular, it was kind of an interesting moment in time. A lot of things were shut down. We didn't have an agency of record. It was much harder to produce things. And we had a content strategy, but we didn't have a way to actually execute it in the way that we traditionally would. And so we brought together, a very small group of brand team members, of creative team members, and also worked with some media partners. And incubated the work. So we developed visual idea for one of our top brands, CoverGirl, and then also worked closely with those media partners to say, okay, what's our distribution strategy and how do we get out ahead of the creative? How do we make sure that we're consumer first and that we really are consistent in terms of our brand voice and our brand identity? And what we found is that, we were able to work so quickly. A 6-month process was done within, a week or 2 weeks. And, again, certainly not all of the work was good, but we have an amazing, amazing person on the team who's so creative and has really kind of helped to fuel this for us. And the work that we got out of it is phenomenal, and really excited to see it come to life over the next couple of months. So, I think what it's also done is, we know that there's a reality where in the future we're not always going to be working in this way. We might be working in-house, we might be working with external agencies, and I think it's made us so much smarter in terms of how do we need to work and communicate so that consumer first approach is really kind of carried through in an agency model, and that the idea of really knowing where your creative's going to land is embedded at the very upfront, so it's that much stronger.
Yeah, I think that we talked to a lot of different brands that are on some various end of the spectrum with regard to in-housing a lot of the components, whether it's just the programmatic way, whether it could be aspects of their creative. But I think that there's a lot to be learned from, if you've done it once, if you've established something as you have with this creative in-house team, no matter in the future, to what extent you do that in the future, you've always learned a lot from it during this phase as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's been a lot of things also in this past months with regard to shifting consumer behavior. And I think that there's some great examples of how you guys have worked in partnership and some new ideas as how to meet these new consumer behaviors. Can you give us some examples there?
Sure. So I think one of the things that we've seen as just a great channel for experimentation is gaming. I'm always kind of fascinated by the numbers. I certainly see my kids playing, a lot more than usual right now, but we see that across several age groups, about 35% of time is spent on gaming, 35% of screen time, and it's the same amount as social media. And so we were really curious, like, how can we actually experiment here? And one of the things that we've done with the launch of a perfume called Escato Candy Love is that we've created, we've worked very closely with Animal Crossing and developed an Escato Candy Island. So it's a way of really kind of embedding for a launch in an unexpected, and it's on the most played female dating. A little bit of background noise. Hopefully you can hear.
What's that?
There's a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, I have a little bit of background noise as well.
Okay, sorry guys. Hopefully that'll go away fairly soon. We're getting a little bit of feedback. Okay, perfect. So anyways, just an opportunity to work with one of the top gaming platforms for women and Gen Z women in particular. One of the other things that we okay, guys, the personality-led brand. I'm gonna give it just a moment. Feedback will go away. Okay, that seems to be working now.
Yep, better.
So one of the things that we've seen is that personality-led brands are really resonating with consumers, and so we've done some experimentation here. We launched a brand called Marc Jacobs Perfect over the summer. It's a fragrance launch, and really it was, if you think of the environment at that time, it was one of the worst times to launch a fragrance. It was when a lot of retail was shut down. Drives fragrance typically is scenting. It's actually being able to smell something in store or try a scent strip is really what what makes consumer convert. But what we found is that we, with this personality-led brand, we told the story of Marc Jacobs, and he has this great story about tattooing perfect onto his arm when he had just come out of rehab, and it was just a reinforcement that he was perfect just the way he was. And so we told this story through different types of creative and content and channels where consumers were spending time, including TikTok. And we found that it was the #1 fragrance launch, and really kind of broke the codes of what you'd expect. We couldn't scent things in the way that we would, but just the openness to that story was what really resonated with consumers and made it such a successful launch. Ted, I think you might be on mute. Yeah.
I think when you talk, when you talk about what you did with Snap with regard to the nail polish that you've done with Sally Hansen, I believe it was, as well as what you've done with Marc Jacobs and the perfume. I think it's fascinating to think that people are looking for little bits of joy, little ways in which they can experience these brands. I think, and it's exciting to see how you've paid that off for them in a lot of ways. That's really fun for them. In some ways, I think that innovation doesn't necessarily need to come through something tricky or technical, but it can be just about the storytelling, as you note, which is really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. For Sally Hansen, what we saw that was so interesting was that, if you think of the way consumers usually discover a nail polish, it's when they go in store and there's a beautiful display with great color. And during the pandemic, we saw really interesting took place with consumers, not being able to go into the salon anymore, so purchasing a lot more nail polish. And then really, as you mentioned, like looking for a little bit of an escape, as we all were at a certain point in time. So we did a Snapchat filter, an AR filter with Snapchat that allowed consumers to try on these beautiful shades called marine metals. They could convert immediately online. And it was that experimentation that I think just allowed us to really fuel that change in consumer behavior. And we grew triple digit over the past several months online. So definitely, as we see that change in consumer behavior, it gives even more opportunity for innovation.
That's amazing. What are some other brands that you think about? Any other brands that inspire you out there? They could be outside of your category, of course. Any other brands that you think of that are really exciting to you?
Yeah, I had fun actually trading some stories with you about this. But one of the ones I love right now, is I think of brands that are really kind of resonating right now. It's brands that either make my life simpler, in the midst of a lot more chaos than we're normally dealing with, or brands that have great storytelling or that give you an element of escape. And one of the brands that I think is doing it so beautifully is a brand called Sakara, which is a wellness brand that's, a D2C direct-to-consumer brand that's really, I think kind of changing the way you talk about wellness and healthiness. They don't talk about calories, but it's really, brought to life through incredible storytelling around ingredients and around food. I'm not vegan. It's a vegan platform, but I'm like one of the, I think I'm an incredibly loyal follower now. And it just gives, an ease to life and a simplicity, and then also an element of escape, which I love. I think I lost you for a moment there, Ted. Okay, you're back.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite brands that I think of, recently is Tracksmith as a brand, and I think similar to Cigar, it's one that is just an amazing job of telling, a story, and this is for them, it's for runners specifically, but it's it's a really interesting way in which they've tapped into that and given something very real, and it might be through a print magazine or something, or catalog that they send you, but through using all the various touch points, it's they really capture their audience in a really exciting way.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we have some time for some questions here, if from the group, if anyone has any questions. Okay, first question is, can you define e-commerce and digital commerce for your company?
That's a really good, really tough question. I think, I think e-commerce obviously is something that has been such an important part of how we've navigated the last several months. So for Coty, it was historically a lower percentage of our overall sales. But speaking to kind of that Marc Jacobs Perfect launch, for example, what we've seen is that there was such a change in consumer behavior and such a ramp up, where fragrance was typically one of the categories where you saw a lot less conversion online, a lot less e-commerce focus. We've actually seen that double during the last couple of months. And then in addition, within consumer beauty, which is where I've been spending my time, more recently, what we've seen is also a dramatic ramp up in terms of just adoption of buying through e-com. Obviously, we all know how Amazon's during this time, but it's also, we've seen great innovation from some of our partners across, Walmart, Target, Ulta, et cetera, many others. Sephora, who's been innovating for quite some time, that's really helped us to drive our businesses in a bigger way. What we're seeing, as we're finding e-commerce, it's really about making sure that we're where consumers are, and that we have, the best in class content, we have great reviews, we have, really incredible experience with consumers to make sure that we're servicing them in the way that they want to be serviced, and providing great customer service, even if it's through a partner. And I think this has helped us really to adapt to some of the changes, particularly in categories like nail, which was mentioned, but also for brands like Philosophy, for example, where we saw that hand care started being, such an important part of what consumers were searching for. The search trends were really, really amplified in April, early May, et cetera. And so we started actually developing content with our partners that allowed us to speak specifically to that change in consumer behavior. And so it put those products that they were searching for really at the forefront and drove incredible conversion results. So definitely a key focus for us.
That's great. Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder with the in-house team that you built, did you find it was easier to develop content to some of these constituencies or the audiences you're trying to communicate with as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we have an incredible e-com team who's been doing it very, very well for quite some time. And what I love about what they're doing is that they're cascading learnings so quickly across the organization. Whether, there's things that we learn as we integrate brands like Kylie, or things that we're learning across luxury that we're sharing with our consumer beauty side or across different partners. So that's been very, very helpful. But certainly that close connection with that team and the ability to have an in-house team to actually fuel the work is making it super quick for us to kind of adapt to those learnings. I think of what we did on Philosophy, I think we turned it around within a day. And that was because we had a super smart e-com team that was, seeing these signals, making sure marketing was aware, and that the creative came there very shortly thereafter.
Yeah, fascinating. What do you think that heritage brands can learn from newer digital first brands when it comes to authentically marketing to Gen Z?
I think it's really fascinating to watch. I think there's so much to learn. Part of the thing, one of the things I tried to do throughout my career is kind of pivot back and forth. We talked about this a little bit at the intro, but across categories, where I think there's incredible learnings across food and wellness and beauty and other categories. And then also, across, smaller or founder-led brands and larger brands. So, one of the things we talked about before was that idea of disruption, where it was, it's really about, absolutely knowing the codes of the category, but making sure that you know where you can disrupt, because it's very efficient. It makes your brand stand out. It doesn't require like a big, heavy, media budget, and all of them are more constrained than we used to be, I think, these days. So I think what, is also really compelling about some of the founder-led brands is just that very authentic brand voice. And we talked about this through a couple of examples, but I think as you become, a bigger heritage brand, it's really so important to be able to go back to say, how do you maintain that authenticity and that consistency? A lot of the work that I've done is actually repositioning brands that maybe just forgot who they were for a while too. And, I mentioned this once, but doing exercises around like what your brand is not, I think is really helpful in terms of, as a big brand, tightening your brand voice. For brands like Fructis that I've worked on before, that was really kind of an unlock for us to say, okay, this is how we need to make sure that we're really reining in the brand and being more consistent, having that true brand voice.
Interesting. Yeah. When you, going back to your time with Kind, what are the big differences you see from working with a CPG brand like Kind and some of their audiences versus the audiences that you're engaging, with the vast portfolio of brands that you have with Coty?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Can you say that just the differences between like a founder-led brand versus working for a broad portfolio of brands?
Yeah, exactly. I think
okay.
that's
Great. No, I think, from a resource standpoint, one of the biggest things that you need to adapt to, obviously, as you move from a bigger company or portfolio of brands to a smaller company is really the resources. Often, with a founder-led brand, you're growing so quickly that, you really, you adapt as you have to. So it's really, it's resourcing things in the way that allow you to feel growth. And really when you have to move to the next level or resource more, than you do that. So I think what's really great about having that type of experience is it makes you much more choiceful in terms of what you do and how you make your choices. When I moved from Kind, where we were able to increase penetration by 50% over a 6-month time period by taking that approach and really scaling up the brand, and then moving to Coty, which had this beautiful portfolio of 17 luxury brands. I think the benefit of having that experience was that it helped me to understand that I came from an environment where you can't spend everything, right? You can't spend the same amount on 17 brands. And even with the biggest companies, you can't or shouldn't do that. So a lot of the work that we did there was just saying, okay, what really drives a brand's growth? And what we found is, like, on a brand like Chloe, it was influencer-led content that was very efficient. On a brand like Gucci, it was telling that beautiful story. And on Marc Jacobs, it was just targeting a little bit differently with great media assets. And so we did a lot of work to be more efficient with our spend and much more choiceful in terms of the approach. And that really helped us to turn around the business before COVID for several months in a row.
That's interesting. That's so at Audigent, one of the things that we do, so we, as you know, that we basically help publishers to monetize their data for various applications in the programmatic space. And so we can take a brand like someone like Vogue and their audiences specifically, and then leverage those to be able to be used in CTV or other new and exciting platforms. One of the great use cases for it is to be able to do a lot of testing across different audiences versus different types of creative. Is that something that you guys have done across brands, or something that you've done, with specific brands in any sort of way to leverage programmatic expertise?
Certainly, I think we have done it, and I think part of the question, I think, was on really understanding creative that's working, and so Lots of testing that's been done there. I think what's so great about tools that are becoming much more accessible and available now is that years and years and years ago, it was a very expensive and long process to be able to do that, and now you can test so quickly that I think the optimization capabilities are incredible. So I think, combining some of like newer opportunities to test with some of the traditional ones through, traditional creative testing is incredibly helpful to make sure that there's ongoing optimization. Fun,
exciting. Okay, I have sort of a somewhat practical one I think that's interesting from the group. So how do you ensure that team members feel engaged and inspired in a remote working world? I mean, I think in your role, it's so much about, inspiration to your consumer base, but I would guess a lot of the work is internally and working with the teams as well. So how do you balance that, and how does that work?
Yeah, it's I've been so inspired by some of the different conversations that I've heard, the one right before me as well, in terms of how people are doing it. And I think there's a lot of creativity in terms of how people are inspiring, engaging their teams. It's really tough. I actually, at the beginning of COVID had 3 different roles, and 2 of them were new, and some of them were international. I was working with international counterparts. So it was really moving into these roles when I didn't have that, one-to-one contact with people, face to face, and it was really hard. And really, what I found that has worked for us is a couple of things. The first was just putting the video on, and making sure that that the team could see that, there was a reality and humanity to what was going on. So, you probably saw my husband before running up and down. You usually see the kids in the background. There might be a violin lesson. There's a dog barking often. So I think just making sure that people know that that's okay, and that we're all kind of facing that is really, really helpful. We would do impromptu coffees and things like that, that just, gave a chance to do something that wasn't just a Zoom call where we were, presenting something and driving things forward. So I think that was helpful. We canceled all Friday meetings in the afternoon, which I thought was just hugely beneficial, because what we found, and I think what all the statistics show, is that teams are they're working more hours than ever. And the majority of my team has young children. And so were just kind of small ways of giving a little bit of breathing room, in addition to blocking like a lunchtime meeting so that people could actually feed their kids and feed themselves and feel like they could move on to the rest of the day. And like they had a little bit of a refresher that could to make them ready to jump back in. So, but very inspired to hear what others are doing as well, because I think there's some great ideas in terms of how to engage right now.
Yeah. I think we're all working very different hours at this point. They may be the same hour, they may be sort of allocated in different ways. But I think that idea of, giving Fridays back at the tail end when people are exhausted is a nice way to think about it as well.
Helps.
What are you looking forward to? I like the question from the tail end of the last one about, like, as we look into 2021, what are you looking forward to? Sort of as a side aspect of that question, I wonder, CES is usually a big thing that people participate in. If that's going to be different or virtual this year, how do you kick off a year as a marketer?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's with planning sessions with the team. So we've got really great, exciting stuff going on internally. So I think part of it is going to be just, as a team coming together, doing some creativity workshops. A lot of what I'm doing now, instead, because we can't go to the conferences, I'm certainly joining virtually, but I'm also just reaching out to my network and trying to understand what's inspiring them, what's interesting, getting lots of great book recommendations, looking at different things online, but really kind of trying to feed that curiosity in different ways. And I found that there's really good, suggestions and feedback. So that's one of the things that I think is really helpful. Well, how about you? I'd be curious to understand what you're looking forward to.
I mean, I think that I'm looking forward to travel at some point at a far off aspect. Personally, I'm looking forward to live music whenever that's possible as well. But I think that another busy, exciting year ahead of us. With our company, I think that we've learned a lot from this year about how to operate remotely, and I think that sort of figuring out how to maximize that and work with partners, is something that we're looking forward to just getting better at next year, even as we sort of move through it.
Absolutely. And definitely miss live music so much too. Can't wait till it's back eventually. Yeah.
Any other leaders that you look up to? Somebody asked the question of, are there brands that you look up to, which I think is somewhat similar to the question we had earlier, but are there leaders in marketing that you draw inspiration from as well?
You definitely had some mentors at Coty and elsewhere that I still keep in touch with that have just, I think, been really helpful in terms of navigating my career. I think what's inspiring me most right now, I actually, for example, was on a panel last night. It was a really small group of women, but just hearing how women are navigating through some of the challenges that we're facing. There are women who are sharing stories and being much more, I think, vulnerable than they normally would be. And I think there is a humanity to what's that people are embracing because of what's been going on. That's just incredibly helpful. Have tons of different news sources, every day from Kara Swisher to others. I think there's just, I love the idea of, continuing to kind of evolve thinking, but also developing a network and relationships of people who are like going through similar experiences and who can share what's working for them.
Yeah, we're participating in a discussion next week about podcasts and about music as well. I mean, music is a key category for us at Audigent as well. But when you consider consumers tapping into new channels like audio and through podcasts, I'm curious, are you guys leveraging those as well?
We are, and it's funny because it brings me back to a couple of years ago when I think that one of the first times I talked about an audio strategy many years ago, people thought I was crazy, and it was something that worked incredibly well. So one of the things we tested was actually within beauty, within hair care, an audio strategy. And if you think of like traditional advertising in that category, it had always been about a very visual approach and the hair flip, and like beautiful cascade of hair. And so the idea of, actually expressing a benefit through audio didn't necessarily make sense in the beginning. And we saw that it worked really, really, really well. And I think now there's just so many more opportunities, I think, to evolve an audio strategy. So really excited about what's ahead.
Well, yeah, if you look at Alexa or Google Home or various ways in which people are interacting in a way that's more audio forward, I think there's certainly an opportunity to discuss that there and to be in a more intimate setting with people as well.
Absolutely. And even from, what we see is that, online digital music, it always works incredibly well because it's such a passion point. So have seen a ton of success, there as well.
Are there particular new technologies that you guys are utilizing to execute your strategies? Somebody just brought that up as a question as well.
It's a good question. I mean, I think from definitely things that we're continuing to to evolve. I think AR is really, really interesting, particularly for beauty. If you think of what's so inherent in the category is this idea of transformation. So yep. I think one of the things that's really inspiring to us is like, how do you bring that to life in a way where you don't have to say a benefit like 10 times more volume or these things that consumers don't really connect with in the same way anymore? How do you show it, and what technologies can help you to really bring that to life in a powerful way, in a way that feels different? I think there's some brands that are doing it in a really interesting way right now too. So very much inspired by that.
That's great. Let me see. I think that's all the questions that we have from the group. Emily, looks like she's coming aboard.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I had one follow-up question for you, Erin. Thank you guys so much. That was such a great session so far. So I remember I mentioned in the beginning how, you previously worked in the fashion space, and I saw also the CPG industry. So I'm just curious, what have you found has translated over from different, business functions and verticals throughout your career as someone who's more early on in my career? And why do you feel like it's so important to always, continually throw yourself into new challenges?
It's a good question. I love the kind of being thrown into the deep end a little bit and having to figure things out. So to me, it's something that like terrifies me, but also kind of fuels me throughout my career. And the idea of going from like potato chips and beer to beauty and stilettos and snack bars, I think has just been so fun. There has been a lot that's been built over time. And it's funny as I think back to like some of the best learnings now, there's so much discussion around consumer experience. And it's almost like a renaissance, I think, of, it's becoming much more embedded in organizations. And so I'm so lucky to start my career by actually working on the sales floor. And, often as a manager having to deal, challenges and turnaround situations and making sure that, the consumer experience that was blasted out, for a fashion brand, for example, really came to life in store when somebody's working one-on-one with somebody. And so that's been something that I think has been really a common thread in terms of like, how do you build that knowledge and experience across categories, and how do you make sure that you're not only developing amazing creative, but you're also ensuring an incredible consumer experience, whether it's driven through word of mouth or in store or elsewhere. So that's been really interesting. And I think also just this idea of a lot of like repositioning of brands. We talked before about what you're not as a brand, really like creating a distinct voice and seeing how that carries through in terms of performance across, food-driven brand versus a beauty brand. I think has really developed kind of this different approach to creative, but always really staying close to the consumer and really understanding your brand voice and who you are.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. No, I feel like sometimes when you're stuck in the same silo for so many years, sometimes it's really good to bring in people who have been in different industries to bring in, new perspectives on what's worked for, a chip brand or a soda brand that you could find a way to adjust and implement for a beauty brand, which you wouldn't necessarily think, but there's definitely crossovers. So that's really